Oh hey, it's Jessie here, coming in to tell you that maybe you should submit a blog to Lonely Conservationist. Because listen, you've been listening to the podcast for a bit, you've heard all the amazing blogs in this season, and you've learned so much about different people's perspectives of what it is to be a conservationist. But you know what's missing? Your story, and I really want to hear it. So if you head on over to the website at lonelyconservationist.com, there's a page for submitting your story. There's story prompts if you get stuck, and there's literally nothing to stop you from telling your story and representing your experience in the conservation world. Not even your pesky imposter syndrome, because look, it's okay if you're a student, it's okay if you're not a paid professional conservationist, because so many of us aren't anyway. And your story and your experience is important for us to be able to share what you're going through so we can help you out. Your story is another piece of the puzzle as to why we should be conserving conservationists in the first place. So head on over to the website, tell me your story, and maybe you'll be in a podcast episode in the future. Who knows? But I can't wait to read it. Until then though, let's head into the podcast. Hello and welcome to How to Conserve Conservationist, the podcast, Season 2, all about you. My name is Jessie.
And I'm Todd.
I think I stumbled in that in my name. One day we'll do a good intro. But anyway, this week is episode 8. We're almost at the end. Savor these episodes for they are running out. But this one in particular is about natural disasters. A really unfortunate time if you're in the field and everything in nature goes completely wrong. Like God stands up, puts his big trident down and is like, chaos! And you're like, ah! And it's quite unfortunate. As you can
that's putting it lightly.
Yeah. It's the end of the weekend. Todd and I are quite exhausted, but nonetheless, we're going to persevere. We have donuts waiting for us as a reward. So let's go on talk about natural disasters. Come along with us. So 2 blogs we're going to be talking about are Sarah and Jessica, and Sarah's natural disaster is a tsunami and Jessica's is the bushfires from Australia.
It is so weird you're speaking about this as if you're talking to primary school, kindergarten.
That's how I roll. I'm just the kindergarten teacher of the day. Todd and I actually just tried to record this podcast for like 2 seconds, but I kept talking in a kindergartner voice. It just wasn't working for me. This is a very serious subject.
It's still bleeding through.
It's a very serious subject, and I want to give it the gravitas
It's
that
a bit
deserves.
serious.
But at the same time, apparently the way I communicate with people is by being a primary school teacher. So let's let Sarah do the talking.
Yes.
Sarah's blog talks about how she went on a scuba trip with her parents to Thailand, and they all wanted to get certified as scuba divers. That's the one. Okay. And basically they had such a good time. They loved the marine life so much, and the coral and everything, that they decided to go back for Christmas. So they had planned this lovely Christmas holiday where they spent a lot of time sightseeing, scuba diving, seeing all the rainbow fish and the coral. And
she talked about seeing like a mama shark with her babies just hanging out.
Yeah, really cute.
Which I don't picture of sharks being maternal.
Well,
maybe that's just a stereotype.
Some sharks lay eggs and some sharks, like hammerheads, have live births. So you have tiny little hammerheads. I know. Sharks are very diverse and very cute.
They're diverse, but all of them are cute.
Yeah, they're all cute. Even the big ones. I was snorkeling in Thailand once and I was struck by the rainbowness of the fish. I thought there was an official word for the rainbowness of things. I was like, the rainbosity.
But the wide spectrum of colour.
Yeah, it's like you're snorkeling through this amazing clear water and it's just like every fish is a different colour of the rainbow and it's like phenomenal. I've never seen that before. So it just takes you by surprise almost how beautiful and colourful the marine life is there.
It sounds really magical until she mentions like baby jellyfish were trying to eat her face the whole time.
Well, that's the thing. If like the jellyfish spores are like stingy, they're like a little bit stinging.
She's like, why do my face and hands sting?
Yeah, so that's what happens when you go to Queensland. There's like specific beaches that you can go to and can't go to, and they have like jelly nets that are up. So I just got my hair caught in my necklace. Okay, everything's fine. So yeah, they went back for their Christmas break with the premise that they were going to have a really lovely time together, keep scuba diving. I think that's really beautiful as a family to be able to have a hobby of scuba diving, because whenever I want to go snorkeling, nobody wants to come with me. I have to, like, when I moved to Melbourne, I was so thankful to have friends that cared about snorkeling and like wanted to come with me, because like it's just hard to find people that wanted to just spend time with fish. So often Todd gets dragged along.
I've gone snorkeling and enjoyed it, but everywhere you take me is always like brown next to a sewage outlet. You're like, this is where the most interesting fish are. I'm like, oh, it's gross though.
I actually took Todd to a marine sanctuary where I've snorkeled at quite a few times, and it's always been amazing. I've seen like banjo sharks, so many sea stars, so many fish. And then I take Todd and the tide was out, because obviously I'm smart and I didn't check. And so it was like you couldn't swim many places without worrying about scraping your belly on the seagrass. And I'm like, I don't like scraping my belly on the seagrass. I think this is why some people dive, is because there's so much depth of water and they can choose where they go. But snorkeling, it's like you're at the mercy of how deep the water is.
I've never been so claustrophobic in the ocean before. It's usually the opposite
Especially
feeling.
when you see like gnarly big sea stars and you're like, I do not want you grazing my belly.
Yeah.
So that was my biggest fear in the ocean, but now let's talk about what happened to Sarah. She says, after 6 days of diving, snorkeling and relaxing on the beach, we were due to fly back home. Our flight was in the afternoon, so my mum and I had planned to go down to the beach and do some snorkeling before we left. Unfortunately, yet fortunately, I slept in. My mum came to my room around 8 to tell me that she and my dad were going to get breakfast. I decided to skip it and hop in the shower. After the shower, I was busy blow drying my hair when suddenly the power went out. I thought it was a bit strange and began to look around the room and figure out if it was just the blow dryer or the whole room that had blown. That's when I heard it. If you've ever been to a large waterfall, you'll know the sound. I walked out of my room and saw thousands of gallons of water rushing down the narrow street. I heard the cracking of tree branches as the water pushed past, and yet somehow the island was completely silent. It's pretty eerie.
It's weird, right?
Yeah.
It's not a normal thing that happened in your day.
So basically, because her parents were out, all their stuff was downstairs, so the water was up to her knees. She went down, tried to collect the passports and anything she could grab and bring them upstairs, and just salvaged as much as she could, because as you remember, like, she's separated from her parents at this point.
It's crazy to me that that was her reaction. Like, I can't tell if that's like a really level-headed reaction of like, oh, in a practical sense, like, we probably need our passports.
Well, they're in a different country.
Also, like, my goodness, it's a disaster. Like, save yourself first. Don't worry about any earthly possessions.
I think, like, she must have felt comfortable that she had the ability to, because she talks about it rushing in and rushing out. So it was up to her knees. She tried to grab whatever, but then it went out to her ankles, basically. So it was like, is this one wave, or is this going to keep going? Like, is this one hit of damage, or is it going to keep pulsing in and out? Kind of thing?
You can't know and like what's going on. Like, in hindsight, the airport's probably destroyed, and like, you're not going to need that passport for a while. Like, no one's going to have that passport.
The airport wasn't destroyed.
It was.
Was it?
Everything was destroyed.
In the whole of Thailand, like, a wave washes over the entire country.
I don't know
Waves
if
aren't
you
that
know
big.
how big the Boxing Day tsunami was.
Well, from Sarah's story of going home, obviously they were able to get home.
Well, they got home eventually, yeah, but like, it wasn't.
I think...
Don't leave your passports. If you're in a plane crash, leave your stuff in the
This
plane.
is not the
Just
same
escape.
as a plane crash.
It's exactly the same.
Well, nonetheless, we digress. Sarah, feel free to give us any extra information about why Todd doesn't know anything about being in a tsunami. She mentions how during this time when she was in the hotel room, she was noticing all the colourful fish she'd seen snorkeling now wash up all on the floor of her room, which would have been a bit confronting, like you just going into their environment and swimming around with them, and now all of a sudden they're washed up on your floor. It would have been like really weird and disheartening.
it would have been like, oh, it's not just a burst water main.
Yeah. There's actual
This
fish
is what
on
is going on
my
here.
floor. So she says, my parents managed to find a way back to our rooms and found me. Still trying to grasp the reality of what just happened, my mum is a registered nurse and she'd done work in rural areas that have had natural disasters before. She knew that if we didn't get to the airport immediately, we would be stuck in Thailand with limited resources, possibly for weeks. See, the airport's fine. You need to get to the airport.
No, but she doesn't know that then.
Her mum knew. She knew.
Well, that's... Mums always know.
They always know. At this point, the water had receded around our ankles and it was much easier to move around. We began to make our way to the main road, walking around the narrow street that 20 minutes earlier had been easily 4 feet deep in water. As we were walking, we began to hear a rumbling sound growing louder and louder. We ran up a set of stairs to the roof of our hotel. When we looked down, the devastation and destruction were immense. There was debris everywhere, cars turned over and smashed, buildings destroyed, trees cracked in half, sand covering everything. There were several other people on the roof, all in just as much shock as we were. We stood in silence and watched the second wall of water forcing its way through the town, bringing down everything with it in its path. Insane. Because I have this fear of being trapped, right? So I don't know if I would have gone to the top of the building, but had this fear that everything below me will crumble and I can't escape because I'm on the top of a building. Like, you can't
What
get
if
down.
the building gets knocked over?
Like what if the what are the things called, the hold up building? The slats? No, just the framework of the building, what if it crumbled with the pressure of the wave and you're just on the top of the building? Like, but what are you gonna do? Like, there's water covering like everything, so you're screwed if you go down. But also, like,
that's the horror of every disaster, right? Like,
yeah.
You can't know what the best thing to do is because it's such a chaotic and random event.
Yeah. So this is another natural disaster, but I used to work with somebody that her 2 daughters died in the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires, and her son only survived by climbing under his ute, which is like his truck or whatever you call it, his utility vehicle, the car with the tray at the back. Anyway, he survived by climbing under his ute, but that's only because the fire must have moved past over the car quick enough for the oxygen to stay under the ute. So like that would
that's not a foolproof plan.
No, so that worked for him, but easily couldn't have worked. But in that moment, he just did the only option that he could have done.
Yeah.
And that metal would have been smouldering as well, like trying to get out from under the ute without touching it. Ooh. But yeah, it's just like, is it pretty much a potluck?
Well, she talked about like, they're on the roof and they were like, well, let's go down and then like get up to the mountains. But like the other people on the roof were like, well, don't go down. You'll get washed away in the ocean.
Yeah.
Like, but like, what do you do?
Yeah, you just have to make snap decisions that feel right at the time. So basically, the next part about that, after she was on the roof, everything is a blur except for she imagines giving some first aid because, as she said, her mum's a nurse, so they stopped to help some people. Then they got in a taxi, and the scary part was they had to head towards the wave to get to the airport. So
Get onto the road.
So to get onto the road, they had to head towards the wave. But when they finally got to the road, then they could go uphill and get to the airport.
The bloody cheeky taxi driver
Trying to overcharge
pulls up
them.
and he's like, "Oh, take us to the hills quick." It's like $100. What? Just haggling over the price. $100. They're ludicrous. Come on, man. $20.
He's in
Wave is literally incoming.
He has a position of power there for sure. He's a smart man.
Yeah. What a hustler, taxi driver. Making the best of the situation.
Yeah. So basically, Sarah and her family got home safe, but then Sarah was pretty much distraught with survivor's guilt after that. I think it hit her the privilege of like being able to escape. Thank God she got the passports. Thank God that they made it out in the split second onto the road before the wave hit again. She just was so thankful she was alive, but at the same time, it was so disheartening that she'd seen all this loss, this wreckage, this chaos, and she survived. And so she had to seek mental health help because of this, because it was such an incident that, like, well, obviously it messes you up.
I need to know how useful the passport was.
Well, they got home. That's
I
how
need the
useful
listeners
it
to
was.
know if you ever question like where's your passport, a valid answer is I was in a natural disaster and I don't have it anymore. That is a valid answer.
Is it?
Yes.
Well, they didn't even have to have that conversation because they had their passports. So I'm sorry, Sarah, that Todd is bickering with you vicariously through this podcast.
No, I can't tell if it's genius or like an example of how you have to make snap decisions.
Yeah, you do. Like anything, you can't really know if you're making the right decision. You just have to, you only have a short amount of time to make a decision. So you just have to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like people like, you wake up and your house is burning and you might be like, oh shit, I just have to quickly go back in and rescue my Xbox or something. You know, something that seems silly.
Yeah.
But like in that moment, for some reason, you're like, oh shit, I need to quickly save it.
I didn't save my game.
Yeah.
I think passports and an Xbox are very different. Like in your mind, I can imagine if I was Sarah, I'd be like, we can't leave this country unless we have our passport. Like it's engraved
you
in
can.
you. Don't lose your passport.
You can,
from a very like, when you're a traveler, keeping track of your passport is like the most primary thing that you do. So that's probably the first thing you think of. Oh, my passport.
It's not for me though.
I know, because you never... Okay, let's not go into... This is not a couples debate podcast. We're talking about natural disaster. Okay, so basically this experience inspired Sarah to become a marine biologist because she saw all the wreckage and destruction that happened to that marine environment. It really inspired her to go back home and to conserve some of the marine environments around her local area in hopes that her conservation efforts would have a ripple effect into all the other oceans. So it's crazy that like this would have scarred some people and they never would have gone into the ocean again.
I could easily believe that and understand that.
Yeah, so it was pretty insane that this like the time the ocean tried to kill Sarah was the moment she's like, I want to save you. The rest of my life is devoted to saving you. I don't know, it's a horrifying, but because she survived, I guess that makes it a cool origin story. Yeah, but like it's crazy because a lot of people are like, oh, how did you be inspired to be a conservationist? Oh, I watched Steve Irwin growing up. Oh, I used to play outside with sticks. And Sarah's just like, I survived a tsunami. Pretty gnarly.
And I knew that day I needed vengeance on the ocean.
So on the opposite end of the spectrum, Jessica's story is about the bushfires that happened last summer in 2019, 2020, where it was like the most insane, biggest bushfires.
I mean, probably could have used a tsunami at that point.
Yeah, we could have. The tsunami could have put out a lot of fires. Her first sentence of the blog is really powerful, so I just wanted to read that. She goes, "My name is Jessica Leck, and as I write this, my hometown is on fire. I live on the mid-north coast of Australia, and this week has seen an area roughly 7 times greater than the Amazon fires burn across my home state." So when I read that, I know because I was living in Australia, well, I am living in Australia. At the time I'm in Australia too, I see the hazy smoke outside. It's too dangerous to leave the house because like the toxins in the atmosphere are too intense. Like I can see the fires, but when I read it, I was like, oh, her hometown is on fire and she's writing this blog. It's very powerful stuff. Because she was writing it in an evacuation center.
Yeah?
Yeah. So basically, Jessica always knew she wanted to be a conservationist, and she ended up going to uni for 8 years, doing all these internships, all these degrees,
story.
Because she's like, you heard me right. If you want to get a graduate position in Australia, this is how hard you need to work. And I was like, thank you. Because I always feel really bad complaining about not being able to be a conservationist in Australia, because I think like we have this reputation of being a country with a lot of opportunities, and it's like we're a westernized country, we're pretty well off as a nation. But I have had to spend like decades of my life trying to get into the industry. And I understand that it's like not as easy as people make it out to be. It's not like oh yeah, do a couple of volunteer jobs and you'll get experience and you'll get in. No, it's like understandable why Jess had to do 8 years of university. But she ended up getting her third graduate job. She says that she's very fortunate enough to get this opportunity, but she ended up in the city in Sydney working as a junior ecologist, and it looked like she was living the dream. Basically, it's like she had the $60,000 salary, she had the desk job in a high-rise building.
That's below median wage.
But for a conservationist, like, that's like more than double what I'm going to earn with my new job. Not that I'd be working full-time hours, but...
The new job that makes you feel like you've also made it.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. But yeah, so everyone was asking her, like, how do I get a job like this, blah, blah, blah. But when her partner came to her and said, look, I've got a job opportunity in a more rural town, she was like, yeah, I'm quitting my job, let's go for it. So there was something that...
I'm not attached to this.
Yeah, something that drew her away from that opportunity.
Well, just to explain, like, a lot of the job was, like, doing ecology and stuff, but at the end of the day, it's like, yes, you're authorized to, like, clear this land.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not like the stuff that you dream of as a kid, being an ecologist.
You don't really feel like you're saving the environment.
Yeah. So luckily enough, she ends up getting I love it, she talks about being the most overqualified housewife in Australia. In that
more so
town.
than you.
Yeah. And she was lucky enough to get a lecturer job at a local university, and she was just starting to make a dent in the environmental education of that town, because she's very right-wing.
I mean left-wing.
And she's very environmental, but as we've talked about in other podcasts, when you're in like a smaller town and it's more rural, you often have more a more conservative culture, and sometimes the answers to problems is just like, oh, let's just clear the land, let's just churn the soil. So she was finally making a dent in this, and she goes on to say, and yet I sit here in an evacuation centre while our homes burned around us, not listening to the discussions of climate scenarios and mitigation. Instead, my ears are flooded with the beginnings of a terrifying, irresponsible ecological demand. Clear felling borders, grazing national parks, while further in the distance, the anti-greens mentality is being further cemented with misinformation. I know every tree I have planted and every shrub I have preserved are now in charcoal, and I hold deep fear that they will be replaced with the security of grazing land. The ecological value I have spent these months communicating to the landowners represents nothing but fire risk to them now. In a region where the far right-wing Conservatives run opposed every term, I'm now finding there's only room for my ideas when all other variables are able to remain the same. I wonder, is this mentality regression an aspect of a positive feedback cycle missed by some scientists? Sorry, I'm just butchering your words, Jeff. Am I getting this right? Right wing is not the conservative one, right?
Right wing is normally the more conservative.
Oh, right wing is
Let's keep things status quo.
Oh, then sorry, I said that Jess was really right wing.
I would consider her left wing.
Yeah. I think I said Jess is right wing. That was a mistake. She is left wing.
I heard you say that, and
Why didn't you correct me?
I didn't want to interrupt.
So she was talking about that the community is very right-wing, very conservative, and she has opposing views to that. I accidentally misread. Sorry. I misspoke, but then I convinced myself that I had read it. So I had to just check just in case. I didn't want to label Jess's political preferences as something that they weren't, but then I ended up doing that anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think, she described herself as a Greens party sort of politically minded
environmentalist person.
Yeah.
So that would be so challenging, because in Australia it's so hard to change farmers and landowners' minds about things. Like, no matter how much you think they're a great person, and
that's not stereotype. It's hard to change anyone's mind about something.
Yeah, but for instance, so there's this old woman that I love to bird with on her property, and she's really great. We bird together, we follow each other on Instagram, like each other's birds, But when I go over her house to burn, she talks about how she'll always vote with the Liberals, who are our Conservatives, because they just know the right thing for the economy, and how Labor's like screwing everything up. So
it's all very superficial. Like, the moment that you call yourself left or right wing, like, obviously you haven't paid attention to like the actual details,
the intricacies of what's going on.
Yeah, like,
yeah. So it's challenging because, like, a lot of my job for the past couple of years has been showing people the logging coups around Victoria. So basically, Victoria has a pulp agreement with a Japanese company called Nippon, and we're contractually obliged to give a lot of our native mountain ash trees, which are the tallest flowering tree in the world. And this agreement was made years and years ago, but now because of all the clear felling and the logging, there's not a lot of these trees left. Less than 5 years of these trees remain, but the contract is still like a contract. Like, they still have to keep providing these trees and logging the land when there's not a lot of habitat left. So it's really frustrating when you talk to people who are like, oh yeah, like, land clearing would give us the money. Land clearing's the option. Oh, there's fires, we'll just clear the land. Really,
it was sparked from the right wing politicians. They tried to say that all the bushfires were the result of all the green environmentalists who wanted to have lots of forests everywhere.
Didn't Trump say a similar thing in America after the California fires? Like, just clear the forest floor.
If we have no more forests, there's no more forest fires. Which is like, I guess it's the solution technically to forest fires. But...
Well, so really what should be happening is, so the First Nations people of Australia, they managed the land for years with controlled burns, and the way they managed the land was so in harmony that there was basically no out of control fires. Not like this, because there wasn't like huge patches of dry land, because they would keep the ecosystem intact, so there was enough water, and things were like, everything was done in a controlled way, and they only took what they needed and worked within the confines of the natural environmental systems and the way things worked.
I was going to say, it's very weird how it's shaken out, because even like modern farmers, they are very aware of the land and very aware of the climate and the effects of all this stuff. Like, so you'd think they would be much more environmentally conscious than the political stereotypes
so
suggest.
Because I went to this training course for the Wilderness Society, and they showed this advertisement for the Liberal Party, and it was basically like, we're a long line of farmers and we care about farmers. So if you're a farmer, we're on your side. And it's just like propaganda.
Well, that's the answer to the paradox is, it's all fake propaganda and marketing.
Yeah.
And it's not, they don't actually help farmers at all.
Yeah. So
which I think farmers have always known.
It's crazy, because if you haven't seen 2040, see 2040, because it's a really solution-based documentary. Yeah, by an Australian documentarist, filmmaker. Basically, he's really great, and I was like, I only saw it because I thought people would expect me to have seen it and make commentary on it. But it turned out to be amazing, because it actually is a solution-based documentary. And during the documentary, it talks about this farm where the family like to go fishing, and so one day they're like, oh, let's go out into the paddock and find a worm so we can go out and catch fish. That day they couldn't find a single worm, and then they're like, if there's no worms in the soil, our soil must be unhealthy. What can we do to get more worms in the soil? And then it started on this journey of what is it called when you farm? You know, the farming.
What?
What is it called? Oh my god, permaculture, where you use, like, you have your crops, but then you also have plants that are supposed to be planted in the area, which gets the soil all nice with hydrogen, and it gets things moving. So you have a row of crops, a row of like native plants, and you alternate them, so it improves the soil health. So it was a good example of how, like, those farmers only acted when it was really, really necessary, but also I don't know if they had the prior educate. Like if farming is a bunch of information passed on from generation to generation, and there might have been an abundance of water and abundance of resources back in the day, the approach to farming needs to change. But if it's just a family business and you've always done it this way, that is not going to be in correlation with the farming practices that need to happen to give you the highest yield in present time.
They do have schools for farmers. You went to one.
Yeah, I went to an agricultural school, but doesn't mean...
That's where they go. That's where they learn all this like technical details of what chemicals the soil needs and stuff.
We did learn that, yes.
Yeah, okay, so they have no excuse.
But that's the problem, like, instead of pumping the soil with chemicals, just plant proper plants there.
Oh yeah, so when you go to school, they're like, what you want to do is put a nice layer of Roundup and then plant your seeds and boom, maximum growth, maximum profits.
Yeah, because we didn't get told about sustainable farming at all at school. That's not something we were taught.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of sides to farming. There's like the economic side to farming, but also you can farm a lot of things. Like you can shear sheep, you can do aquaculture, you can have an alpaca farm. Like there's so much you can have.
Yeah, there's
and like if you have a pig pen, you might not have a lot of paddocks. So how you farm pigs is very different from how you farm cows, and dairy cows and meat cows are very different.
I can believe all this.
Yeah, so it's like it's hard when you're doing 5 years of school and you might only do agriculture for like 2 or 3 years. There's no like specialist class for the exact type of agriculture that you're going to be doing.
I think there also is. I know my friend at a family owned a winery, and like he went to a tertiary class for like how to farm grapes to make wine.
Yeah, we made wine in class.
Yeah, that's a big crop in Australia.
We had to pick the grapes. I swear sometimes we're like free manual labor. Okay, kids, for this agriculture lesson, we're just picking these grapes.
We're just doing farm work.
Yeah. So anyway, like, I guess it's like challenging to re-educate yourself as a farmer as well. Like, I think COVID has taught a lot of people this. We all think we don't have enough time to do the structural re-changes of things that maybe need to be done. But a lot of time in COVID, when we're able to stop and breathe, a lot of people have started restructuring the way they do things very differently. Like, for instance, at my teaching job, they took that time where like, okay, we can't teach in-person classes. Let's look at our material. Let's update the programs. This has needed to happen for ages, but we haven't had the time to do that yet. COVID probably doesn't stop much for farmers, but I think the point I'm trying to make is things just might be go, go, go. You have such a list of things that need to be done. It's hard to sit there and take the time to make a large structural change without facing economic downfalls, or like you get less income this month because you've totally changed the way you farm. So basically, Jess says, what now?
Did her house burn down then?
I don't know. She doesn't say. She just said she was in an evacuation center. And that could have meant that her house was destroyed, or it could mean that she was just in the evacuation center until it was safe enough to go back to her house.
Yeah, at time of writing, she also wasn't sure if it burnt down or not, which is, really scary.
So, Jess, if you want to update us on how your house is, are you okay?
Have you heard from her since she posted this?
We'd love to have an update from you. But basically, she ends by saying, what now? So she spent all this time trying to educate people. The fires came, scared them all into clearing land and reversing their mindset into being less environmental. And
well, understandably now, like anyone with property is like, oh, a gigantic pile of native vegetation is just, a matchbox waiting to go.
Yeah. So she said she just has to keep trying. Like, she's always wanted to be a conservationist. She feels it in her blood, and she just feels like this is a minor setback. But she has to keep persevering, because as long as she's educating people, the more there's hope for proper land management, and maybe there'll be less fires in the future if the land is managed correctly.
Preach it, girl.
So there's 2 examples of lonely conservationists who have faced natural disasters, both very different, one very wet, one very dry.
Very superficially different.
Superficially different, but both...
It was different in that Sarah... It would have been like more stressful. It would have been equally stressful and horrifying, but like she was holidaying there, so eventually she could catch a plane and just leave all that behind.
Yeah, whereas like it was actual Jess's house that she.
Well, Jess, has
burning
like
down.
her home in Ash.
Yeah. Hopefully it's not
A
in
bit
Ash.
longer recovery time in a practical way.
Yeah. So also, what's different about the blogs is Sarah's was it happened like a while ago, so she can reflect on it.
Yeah.
And Jess was in the evacuation center at time of writing, in the midst of it. So, they're
going to be different perspectives.
Yeah, and I also understand that Jess may have had ongoing traumas from this experience as well, and I just want to be respectful of that as well, because like she could have had survivor's guilt, equally the same as Sarah. There could have been the same ongoing. This is really stressful if you like in the moment you're probably living day to day and you don't really think about it. There's no point thinking long term because you have no idea if you're going to have a house. You might have a house, everything might be fine. You might have most of your house with a little bit of a room charred off and you have to replace some things. You might be homeless. Like, it's hard to think about anything other than what's your immediate move today, tomorrow. Like, what are you doing tonight for dinner? Your immediate moves is probably all you can focus on. So I guess it would be interesting now to hear what has happened to Jess and what happened with her life since being in this natural disaster.
It makes me feel really guilty because during those fires in Queensland, I was actually on holiday there, and me and my friend were sitting in a brewery, pub, bar, and just sipping beers while the entire horizon was just black smoke. And I don't know, it felt like it would have made like a sweet album cover or something. But
that's really horrifying.
It was, yeah. We really relished the horrific irony of the moment.
I remember I was in like the back of the Uber to get somewhere with my friend, and we couldn't wind the windows down because the smog was so thick. It was like just too toxic to be outside. So basically we had to go from our house to the car to another building with air conditioning. Like, outside was like, felt really apocalyptic. And that's why
you had to wear a mask.
Yes.
And then COVID happened and we just continued to wear masks.
Yeah, so 2020 was very apocalyptic for Australians because like half the country burned down. Our mask ran out because of the smoke and we had to stay indoors because of the smoke. And so then when COVID hit, it was like, you need a mask and to stay indoors. And we're like, what else is new? Like, still, what do you mean? The fires are just getting like put out. What do you mean? Yeah. So I think like a lot of people in Australia last year were pretty fatigued because it was like, and COVID also hit a lot of people directly after the fire. So some people were homeless and had to now stay indoors when they didn't really have an indoors.
Oh boy,
anymore.
I wish I had an indoor, yeah.
Yeah, so like this is something I don't know, because COVID kind of distracted from the fires. I don't know if people outside of Australia or even like us when we're not in the midst of it, it's hard to remember that like COVID came before the fires had a chance to kind of heal. It came before the fires ended. So people didn't really have time to heal from the fires before COVID hit. And I feel like the government took away a lot of everything was about the fires. And as soon as COVID hit, we didn't hear about the money that they said they were going to put towards helping like towns come back or put towards biodiverse areas.
It was old news already by that stage.
So I really feel for those towns and the people who have lost a lot of their livelihoods and never saw any help from the government because another natural disaster came like plowing through, like, okay, you've had your attention, like it's my turn now. So I just want to take a moment to pay some respects to everybody who has never caught a break still.
Yeah.
It must be really challenging to rebuild your life during a global pandemic. There's no amount of preparation that could ever mentally, physically prepare you for that happening. Because you see pictures of like people being in boats in the middle of the lake surrounded by fire, or like people just standing in a lake with a boat over their head. Yeah,
it was like you're not being hyperbolic saying half the country was on fire, but it was a lot of like the native bushland, like the wilds
just
of
millions
Australia.
And millions of animals
died. I don't know how many. Yeah, a lot of animals and wildlife died. I don't know how many people died. I know like at least a handful. It was like relatively a few.
I saw this thing the other day. I don't know how true this is, They found in the midst of the fires, after the fire got put out, they saw a man in full scuba gear lying in ashes. And what they reckon must have happened is when they flew the helicopter with the big water tanks and put it in the ocean, it picked up a scuba diver, and then they transported to the fire and dumped him on the fire. How horrifying.
That sounds like it can't be real.
It sounds fake.
I don't want to believe that.
Apparently it happened. So
what?
If there's a big fire, don't go scuba diving. If there's a tsunami,
I'd feel safer in the water.
Yeah, but not if somebody, like a helicopter, is picking up all the water and you get sucked in and dropped over flames. It's horrifying.
What the heck?
Yeah.
I haven't heard this. I don't believe it. I don't want to.
I'll fact check it and see if it's true.
Okay, so it turns out that this was a myth. So I'll just read you this article I found that talks about the myth and then what actually happened. So the myth is that a man dressed in scuba gear, wetsuit, mask, fins and a tank was discovered in a cleanup of a Californian forest fire, so not even in Australia. The strangely placed victim, yes, in the branch of a tree, suffered severe burns from the forest fire. However, an autopsy revealed that he didn't die from the fire, but from bad internal injuries, as you can imagine being dropped from that high. They used the diver's dental records to identify him and contacted his family in an attempt to find out how he could have ended up there. The family, horrified, said that the victim had set off diving in the sea about 30 meters from the forest on the day the fire got out of control. Investigators started to piece the information that they'd gathered together. It appeared that the scuba diver had accidentally been caught amongst the thousands of gallons of water taken by a heli tanker, which had been called in to help the firefighters put out the forest fire. So, caught up in one of the massive buckets of water, the diver had been dumped with the seawater in an attempt to extinguish the fire as quick as they could. But this is what actually happened. It says, even though the story has been told time and time again since the 1800s, there's never actually been a record of a diver in scuba gear being accidentally dumped by a helicopter tanker on a forest fire. Authorities have pointed out that even though the water tanker is often taken from lakes and the sea in effort to put out forest fires quickly, the heli tankers suck up water by hoses which only measure a couple of inches in diameter, so no one can actually be sucked into such a small opening and pulled into the tank. So that is a lesson to me to not believe everything I hear. Okay, back to the podcast.
So the last segment of the podcast, if we know a conservationist who has experienced a natural disaster, what can we do for these people?
Just throw love and support and money at them.
Yeah. I think like the survivor's guilt thing is really real. I don't think when I was reading Sarah's blog, I was like, oh, she got out so good, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then like when she talked about the survivor's guilt, I'll be like, oh yeah, so she just witnessed like the destruction of a whole town and she gets to like just fly away back to her cushy life in America.
I didn't want to make it sound like she got off lucky because it would be extra weird to have that experience, fly back and then be around your normal community where no one went through that experience.
Yeah, and nobody would probably care.
And no one relates to you. No one understands. Like, that would be really, really like jarring.
Yeah, that would be jarring. Especially because like if you went back to America and nobody's even heard of this tsunami, it kind of might cheapen.
It was a big deal this time.
It might like cheapen the situation, or not cheapen it, but make it like you experience something that's so real and graphic and violent and nobody else is even knowing about it. Like,
I can imagine friends just telling friends about it and they're like, yeah, not all of us holiday in Thailand all the time. No need to brag.
Yeah, it's like, okay, it's like
that's my assumption.
The second episode ever of the podcast where I was talking about how to communicate with conservationists, and I was talking about the tiger story, how my parents kind of couldn't comprehend that I was chased by a tiger. So they're like, okay, that's nice, sweetie. It could be like kind of the same thing where it's like, we can't comprehend that you're in a tsunami, so we're just gonna like brush it off.
I imagine that happened a lot.
Yeah, so if anybody comes to you and shares that they have been in a natural disaster, please just ask what you can do for them. If you need to be there for support, a listening ear, just watch movies with them with a cup of tea, just be around them. I think being someone that they can rely on for comfort and support in that time is really, really important. And same with like Jess, if she was in an evacuation center and you can ask, like, is there anything I can send you? Do you need any clothes? Do you need any food? Like, how can I help you through this situation? Because the difference between a tsunami and bushfires is the bushfires went for months. It spanned the end of 2019 to the start of 2020. It was like the whole summer period. A tsunami is kind of instantaneous, but the wreckage is like there for a while you try and pick stuff up. So I think the way you approach the two situations would be kind of different. The first one will be, what can I do to support you in a like after the fact way? And then in like a bushfire instance will be like, how can I help you get through this? Because it's like, my friend, for instance, she had to keep going back and forth, evacuation, non-evacuation, like you never know which way the wind will turn. Sometimes you're safe at night, sometimes you have to evacuate. Like it's very unpredictable, and it could be like months of toying with your emotions. You're not sleeping because you don't want to like fall asleep and then your house burns down.
I remember, during the bushfires, we actually went on a camping trip for some reason. And so we would check like the disaster map, like where the fires were.
Mm-hmm.
Did any pop up around us last night? Like,
yeah. So I think that
we had a small snippet of what it would be like to live in the countryside of Australia then.
It goes to show kind of how long it went for that like Todd was able to go on holiday, and that like we also went away for Christmas. Like,
we're like, okay, this is a new normal. Half the country's just always on fire now.
Kind of like the pandemic, where it's so horrific, but it just becomes like your life because it goes on for so long.
Yeah.
I don't think, did the bushfire start after you went away? Because some places...
I went on like 2 holidays during the bushfires.
My God.
It feels really wrong if I think about it now.
Horrific.
Yeah, it was from like November to, I guess, January, February.
Well, I think because you were also working, so Todd's old job meant he had to travel a lot for work. So I think a lot of those trips would be like you had to go for work. But some flights I remember being cancelled because of conditions.
Yeah. I know Canberra Airport was closed, a lot of it, because there was a fire right next to it.
Yeah, right next to the airport. And then, like, Todd's old work had a Canberra office, and they were basically all evacuated. Like, they couldn't go into work. There was, like...
Yeah.
There was an
afternoon they just had to leave the building because the fire was coming up to them.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with fires is it's, like, it's ongoing and, like, depending on where you are, you're okay. Like, there was one time there was a fire, like 5 or 10 kilometers away from us. And so I was just keep monitoring the wind, monitoring where it was. And then most of the time we were fine. So it's very like location dependent. So sometimes you can just live normally or subnormally as much as you can. And other times it could be a split second and your whole house is on fire. So it's just kind of like a long time where you're just on edge. But like some people are living normally, other people can't.
Yeah.
Because we had to, they made all these decisions to cancel fireworks in some areas over New Year's because that would be another fire risk. So it's, interesting, fireworks celebrations just cancelled, an extra year for Australians because they're, in COVID. I guess because Australia's doing pretty well with COVID, there was probably, there was fireworks and stuff on New Year's, right?
Yeah.
But just not, there was attendance.
In Melbourne... They have fireworks in the city, but you tend not to go into the city to look at it, even during normal years.
Yeah.
You sort of you can see the city from the rest of suburbia.
Yeah. So, if you know someone that's been in a natural disaster, cherish them, love them, offer your help and services. And I hope that employees are also very sympathetic. I hope that wherever Sarah was working, she was probably young at the time and was probably still at school. But if that happened to someone that was in a professional career, I hope that your bosses understand and let you take mental health leave or whatever.
How much is Christmas and Boxing Day ruined for Sarah now?
Yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting to hear about that because also it was Christmas time that Jess was in the evacuation center. She was one of our last blogs of the year. So both of them happen around December. So if you want to travel in December, think about the risk of natural disasters. Australia, it's the hottest time of the year. In Thailand, it's the wettest time of the year. No, I don't know. That that's the thing. natural disasters are freak. You never know.
Famously unpredictable.
Yeah, famously unpredictable. We're lucky we had a really wet year this year, so La Nina, come at us. It's been good. So like it hasn't been as torturous as last year. We've had a bit of a break. But yeah, just be nice to your fellow conservationists. And also, if you are a conservationist going away to do field work, just be mindful that freak activities could happen. If you're a marine biologist, check weather warnings for the coast. And if you work in the bush, just be aware of fire risks on hot days. So thank you once again for joining us in our journey about learning more about conservationists. I hope this wasn't a disaster episode to listen to. But if you want to check out more people's blogs, head over to lonelyconservationist.com. Check us out at Lonely Conservationist on Instagram, at Lonely Conserve on Twitter, or even consider supporting us at patreon.com/lonelyconservationist. You can also check out my book if you haven't already, because you know what? I reread it again the other day and it wasn't that bad. Bit bad in the punctuation, but as far as the content goes, I still stand by it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next week for next week's podcast.